Hey everybody, I'm Tom Vasel, and welcome to Crowd Surfing. This is a video series in which we talk about Kickstarter and the different games that are available on Kickstarter. So, as always, let's start with the news and see what's on Kickstarter right now. Okay, so today, my first entry is my pick of the week here, and that is Isles of Terror. This is a competitive or cooperative game, and whenever I see this sort of thing, I'm always thinking, well, one of them is better than the others. But it's from Voodoo Games. Now, I haven't played any of Voodoo Games. I did stop by their booth at Essen. They have a Carnivore and Koala. Carnivore Koala was one of their games that they made, and they look interesting. The art for this game looks phenomenal. The theming of it looks very similar to that of Robinson Crusoe, where you got some explorers, some colonists, and they land on this island, and then things go wrong, and there's, like a spooky background to this, but it just looks great. It looks like a fun exploration game. Then there is a new expansion for Xayah. They're basically redoing Embers of the Forsaken Stars, so that's an expansion that came out with the last Xayah Kickstarter, but now there's a Missions and Powers little mini expansion that adds powers for your ships, an economy board, and things like that, so I'm very interested to see how this one works out. Herbalism is the first Kickstarter from Deepwater. They're the ones that are doing Emperor S4 games. Herbalism is a game I've already played, actually. It's like a deduction style, slightly muddy deduction game. I don't know how else to explain it other than that. You can go watch it. I'll be reviewing it probably after the Kickstarter. I think it's an okay game. Then we have Rambo, the board game. This is from Everything Epic. They've been definitely getting licenses for games lately. I haven't actually played any of their licensed games yet. I'm curious to see how they work out. This one has some pretty good miniatures. Looks like we send your guys down and go on different missions and be just like the movies of Rambo. That could be good, but we'll have to wait to see the final product. Artipia is kickstarting an expansion for Fields of Green Grand Fair. This adds a fifth player to the game and also adds a fair where there is a tractor race and an agricultural market involved. And this looks interesting, but at the same time, did the game need more mechanisms? It's just a tile drafting and laying game. I think it was fine as is. We'll have to see if this extra stuff is worth it. Then we have the Giant Meeple Project. This lady here is making custom meeples for you if you pick one from 4 inches, which is pretty big, to a 12-inch one, which is pretty gigantic. So that's interesting. I like stuff like that. If you're looking for some bling for your office or whatever, this would be cool. Great Northern Games is making Lucky's Misadventures, Episode 42, Lost in Autotopia. So obviously it's not the 42nd game of this. It's just... it's kind of like pulpy comic looking. The artwork on the cards has almost a cartoon, like Looney Tunes style to it. In fact, I'm not so keen. The artwork on the different cards seems to be drawn by different artists. It doesn't seem like it all matches. And it's yet another, hey, fairy tales are not as nice and clean and squeaky clean as you thought they were. And it looks like it has characters from Wizard of Oz and other characters, and they're fighting each other. It's a deck building game, so I'm certainly interested to seeing how it plays, though. And the other games from Great Northern Games I have very much enjoyed. Dicetopia is from a brand new publisher. This is a dice placement game with translucent meeples. It's being called a filler. I really like the look of it. It looks like it takes place in the future with special powers and dice placement and worker placement. I'd like to play it. From Sandy Peterson, we have Planet Apocalypse. This is yet another game with gigantic miniatures that have come from some mean place. In this case, the hell is invading Earth, and you must stop them. It's a cooperative game with giant miniatures. There's a track. I don't know much about this game, but we do have a play of it scheduled at the Gamma Trade Show in a few months, so we'll let you know what we think of it after that. Tantrum House Reviews. You may recognize these folks. They do great reviews on the internet. They also have a segment on Board Game Breakfast, so if you like their stuff, go and back them in their new season of games. Academy Games is known for making historical games. Well, that is over, at least for now, Agents of Mayhem is out. Pride of Babylon is the full name of this. This is like a skirmish game that's set place. It looks like the future, almost like superhero spy type stuff, but it's a 3D, fully destructible board, which means it sounds like you can blow up parts of the board and attack each other, and stuff carries over from the campaign. So they call it Radiant, which is a video game term where things that you do will affect over here, which will affect here. That sounds very promising, and Academy Games does make some good stuff. Not so big a fan of the artwork, but I do like the miniatures. Pulp Detective from Todd Sanders. This is a 1 to 2 player game, and definitely is Pulp Fiction artwork. You can see that they definitely got it from there. It looks like you're playing different cards and trying to solve a mystery with these cards and dice. So who knows? This Pulp Detective is definitely a more popular theme these days. Show and Tile. This is from Jelly Bean Games. Tangrams. I like Tangrams, and this game has a really great video, by the way. But just making different shapes with Tangrams, it's always been something I've enjoyed. So I'm certainly... A lot of Tangram games are pretty bad, actually. They're basically just who can make a Tangram the fastest. Hopefully this one's not quite like that, but we'll have to wait and see. From Burnt Island and Grand Gamers Guild is Endeavor Age of Sail. Now this is kind of a change of pace for Grand Gamers Guild because they've mostly made small games up to this point. This one here is a fairly large game. It's a reprint of an older game where they're talking about, oh, you've played this game to death and everything. Endeavor is a fairly popular game when it came out. I haven't heard anyone talk about it since. It's definitely a Euro game, but this one does look amazing. If all Euro games look like this, more people would play them. Then we have La Runa Age of Kingdoms. This is a 4X game. We have 6 kingdoms. Lots of miniatures come with this game. The kingdoms are very different. It's like a fantasy type realm. It's based on a role-playing game of the same name, La Runa. It looks fascinating, but I don't know enough about the game other than that it's a 4X game with exploration of miniatures. There's a lot of those out there, but this one, at least the theme looks interesting, and there's some pretty cool looking models in there. And then finally, we have Ladder Ball Jr. This is based on Ladder Ball, the very popular game I never heard of, but basically it's an outdoor style game where you're throwing bolas and trying to make them land on different rails for points. Well, this is the same thing, except now it's indoor and on your table. Well, that's the news. Let's keep going.
Hey folks, and welcome to another FOMO, the segment where I take a look at a game that's either seeking funding or about to seek funding that I haven't decided if I'm going to back yet, and I'm worried I might miss out on it. Now for me, that's not always a big game with lots of exclusives. Sometimes that's a small game that I'm worried maybe won't get a print later. Today, we're going to take a look at one of those. We're going to look at Leviathan. Leviathan is an asymmetrical combat game for 2 players that plays out a lot like a tactical combat minis game, but using only a minimal card deck. The players go head to head as either the Captain Ahab character or the Moby Dick player. Each player is trying to eliminate the other player's primary unit, either the Pequod ship or Moby Dick himself. The whale player starts with their 6 whale cards placed face down at the edge of the table so that only they know which card is which. And the Ahab player starts with their primary ship in play on the opposite edge of the table. Each player also starts with 3 tactical cards in hand, and the Ahab player also has 3 additional whaleboats in reserve. The whale player starts the game, and on their turn they must first make a movement for each of their whales. To do so, they place the trident card so that the rearmost point of it lines up with the movement arc of the whale. They can select any direction radiating out as long as it does not exceed the limit lines on the whale card. The card is then picked up and moved using the movement card as a guide that shows both a minimum and maximum amount the whale can move forward. After moving all whales, they make one additional action for the turn, which can either be to move a whale card of their choice an additional time, to carry out a special maneuver, or to declare and resolve an attack. If they select a special maneuver, they may either switch the position of 2 unrevealed whales on the table, or they may turn a whale of their choice 180 degrees in place. I'll cover attacks here in a minute. The Ahab player on their turn must first make 1 movement per ship they currently have out on the playing area, following the same method as the whale player, but note they do have a different movement card. After moving, they then do one of 2 actions, either make an additional movement with one of their ships or carry out a special maneuver. For the Ahab player, the special maneuver allows them to bring one of their additional boats into play by lowering it in the water next to the Pequod. It may face either direction the player chooses, but must extend out past the stern or prow of the Pequod. After this, the AHIP player may then declare and resolve one attack. Attacks in the game are resolved the same for either player. An attack may be declared anywhere two cards overlap. Any hidden whales at this position are flipped over, revealing what they are. If they are a Trick of Light card, then that card is removed from play. If there is still at least one whale and one vessel in the fight, the attacking player declares which card is attacking and which card is being attacked. If the attack value of that card is higher than the defense value, then the attacker wins. When a whale is defeated, it is removed from the game. When a vessel is defeated, it is flipped over and now becomes a capsized boat. If at any time the AHAB player causes two of his vessels to overlap, he must choose one to capsize. Whales may overlap at any time without effect. The AHAB player may overlap one of their boats with a capsized boat in order to rescue the sailors and bring back a tactical card played previously. Tactical cards for the players are played when appropriate, with the note that the whale player cannot play a tactical card and perform a special maneuver in the same turn. When the whale player uses a tactical card, it is removed from the game. AHAB may regain used tactical cards by rescuing a capsized boat, as noted before. The game continues until either the AHAB player destroys Moby Dick or Moby Dick destroys Pequod. If at any point all three additional whaleboats are destroyed, leaving only the Pequod, then each player gets 3 more turns. If neither player manages to win in that time, then the game ends in a draw. So that's an overview of Leviathan. Now that was a prototype copy they were kind enough to send to me in advance of them launching their Kickstarter for this segment specifically. Now I was a little worried about the game because the game really does emulate a miniatures tactical game in a few cards that fits in my pocket, and that's something I'm always looking for. Something that has the feeling of a bigger tactical type war game, but I can put it in my pocket and carry it around with me and set it up whenever I have the time. The game also plays quickly. Average I found was about 15 to 30 minutes. Now the game itself, the theme comes alive. I really did enjoy the asymmetrical nature of it. The whale player feels just different enough from the AHAB character and vice versa. The game also gave me a little bit of a feeling of, say, X-Wing. So for me, this is a game that I definitely think that I do want to back, and this is going to be my FOMO scores on it. Now they are going to be launching this game, I believe, on February 15th, which should be the day after this video. They did unsuccessfully tried to launch this campaign previously, and I actually am hoping that this game funds this time. I hope you've enjoyed this look at Leviathan, and I look forward to seeing you folks next episode.
Last time I talked about the 48 hours, the final countdown, and how that can be kind of stressful for a Kickstarter. But then the Kickstarter ends. And that is where there's a lot of work that's involved in it. Now, Kickstarter has, I've talked about this in the past, about Pledge Manager and Backer Kit, and there's different methods of helping you, because Kickstarter doesn't really do a good job. They allow you to send out a survey, and a survey you can ask any questions you want. So you ask these questions, they send it to you, you download it in an Excel spreadsheet, and you do it. But that's kind of problematic because there's a couple problems with that you have. If you send this out to people, you need to send these out as soon as you possibly can, because you need to know how much of whatever you're making you need to make. Okay, that's fine. So you do that, but the earlier you send them out, then the addresses are wrong. So then you have to kind of say, well, you can go in and change your address, but if you allow people to change their addresses, then when you ship the stuff, the addresses are wrong, or you have to go back in there and re-import it. So it's kind of a mess, and these pledge managers and backer kits and different things like that help at the end of a campaign, but they charge you money, which is unfortunate that you have to use that service. Kickstarter should have this stuff built in, but they don't. Directly after a Kickstarter, you watch all the pledges go through, and what Kickstarter does is they charge everybody on the credit card you put in, and a good chunk of them, I would say 10%, don't work. Maybe a little bit less than 10%, but 10% can be a lot. Now, Kickstarter will send a message out 48 hours later, and they will continue to send messages out for a while before canceling those pledges. So for using my Kickstarter, for example, we initially had $25,000 that was not coming through, which was almost 10% of the whole campaign. However, that has been narrowed down to $5,000 missing. Now, sometimes it's because the card doesn't work, or Kickstarter doesn't do it properly, and because Kickstarter doesn't take things like PayPal and other ways, a lot of times you have problems with overseas or whatever. But for the most part, when you go into a Kickstarter campaign, you have to realize that kind of off the top is going to happen. That even if you reach your goal, there's going to be some percentage of backers that's not going to go through. So then you got to deal with all that and then get the amounts. And then you go to the part about the production and shipping. Now, a good Kickstarter will probably have a lot of this stuff in place already. But many times the whole reason for Kickstarting was so that you could get the money. And you can't start producing things until you have the money. And so once you get the money, and Kickstarter doesn't give you the money right away, that could be anywhere from 2 weeks to a month before you get your money, then you proceed to making the stuff. And then even more problems can happen at that point in time, but we'll talk about those next time. Meanwhile, let's go to people who are vastly smarter than I am.
This is Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about your funding goal. This is the amount of money that you need to raise to have any backers' credit cards charged on Kickstarter. If you don't reach that funding goal, you don't receive any money, no one spends any money. Funding goal is one of the great things about Kickstarter because it mitigates risk for both parties. It means that a backer isn't spending money on something that's not going to be made, and you're not investing a ton of money on something that nobody wants. I'm going to talk about a few things today. The 3 scenarios that you need to plan for with your funding goal and how to calculate the funding goal itself. For a board game project or any tabletop game project, first you have to figure out what the minimum print run is. For most manufacturers, for example, I use Panda. Panda's minimum print run is 1,000 copies, and they really prefer to do 1,500 copies. There's definitely a cost difference between those two, and the cost per unit goes down the more that you make beyond that. If you want to make a game with, say, the Game Crafter, they might have a much smaller minimum print run. In fact, I think you can just do 1 copy of a game on the Game Crafter. So you need to figure out that quantity, the manufacturing cost for that minimum quantity, the shipping cost for that quantity. So you kind of have to estimate where your backers will come from. You can look at, like, post on my blog, I share like the backer demographics, the breakdown worldwide. So you can calculate a rough estimate of international shipping and US shipping or wherever you are. Any costs that follow the project or happen during or after the project, such as art and graphic design, fees like Kickstarter fees, credit card processing fees, and it's nice to have a buffer. So I usually try to build in a 10 to 20% buffer within that funding goal because things happen that you don't expect. So you calculate that number. Say that number is $20,000 for the minimum print run, all those other costs involved with it. Then the only other factor that you have to decide is how much money are you willing to invest in the project yourself, your own personal funds. And so this is a way to lower the funding goal a little bit, not quite artificially, but in a way that might make it easier to reach, because the easier the funding goal is to reach, the more likely more backers are going to join in, because backers like to join a project that is already funded. So if you have, say, $5,000 that you can invest in the project, then you might make your funding goal, based on that 20,000 number, you might make your funding goal $15,000. 3 other quick things to think about after you come up with that goal are just think about 3 different scenarios. Scenario 1 is if you don't meet your funding goal. Ask yourself some questions. I have a blog post about this if you want to look at it. Ask yourself some questions about what that means if you don't meet the funding goal. 2, if you barely meet the funding goal. Most of us hope when we launch a Kickstarter project that will wildly overfund, but if you have a $15,000 project and you raise $16,000, what does that mean for you? Is that reasonable? Can you actually make the game based on that estimate? And 3, what if you wildly overfund? And there are a lot of other questions that you want to ask if you do wildly overfund. Is my shipping infrastructure set up for this? Am I prepared to fulfill 20,000 games? Can I make 20,000 games? Can I do it on schedule? All those questions that go along with that too. So that's a broad strokes overview. I'd recommend checking out my blog post about the funding goal and the 3 scenarios that you need to plan for when thinking about your funding goal. Good luck.
And that's it for another crowd surfing, folks. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you next time. Have fun. There's a lot of great projects out in Kickstarter right now. I mean, it is just loaded with really good games. Go check some of them out. Until next time, I'm Tom Vasel. You've been watching Crowd Surfing on the Dice Tower.